All right, thanks for tuning in to another edition of Jets FM on EOFN for this Tuesday, the 10th of December, 2019. Brought to you by ourlads.com, providing the best New York Jets depth charts in the business. So, Jan, the battle of faithless Jets fans versus loyal Jet fans continues this week. And I'm actually glad to see once again, and we moved to another writer for the New York Post, Mark Cannizzaro, that had a nice article this week on that topic. It's good to see that some of these writers are actually sticking up. I guess you can call it sticking up for the Jets for the fact that they've won 4 out of 5, and yet there's still a lot of Jet fans that want to do nothing but complain.
It's a lot of being a Jet fan. It's kind of in our DNA, I think. They had good moments in that game. They had some bad moments in that game, as per usual. The good to me was the red zone defense. Clearly holding them to 7 field goals is an indication of they clamping down in the red zone. The bad is, Fitzpatrick had lots of room to run and lots of guys were wide open, and they had a difficult time of getting off the field at times. And you could say they were quote unquote bailed out by an official's call, though. If you watch the replay, especially even live, there's definitely contact made before the ball got there, so it was the right call. But given the situation, it wouldn't have shocked us if a call wasn't made. But the other thing I noticed also, as I tweeted a couple of times, is Sam Darnold needs to have a little bit better of an internal clock at times, getting rid of the ball. I know he wants to make a play, but there late in the game, he's got to get rid of the ball and get rid of it quickly to avoid kind of taking the sack, which to me is was paramount in that situation. So given this scenario that led into the game with Le'Veon Bell missing the game with the flu, and then I'm sure we'll go through some of the other stuff that came out afterwards. Powell and Montgomery stepping up. The resurgence once again of Robbie Anderson, and it was a tweet out yesterday. If you look at last year versus this year, and kind of same time frames, his first 10 weeks, and then following thereafter, they're clearly once he hits week 11, he kind of has something that sparks his game, and he all of a sudden wakes up. And I know you and I have talked a lot about Anderson. The one thing I will say I was very impressed from watching the game. His route running and his route tree looked a heck of a lot better, because if Darnold was on in that game, Anderson could have had 200 yards receiving and a couple touchdowns. That's how wide open he was at times during the contest.
All right. Good night, everybody. All right, so let's go take it one step at a time. So again, I get the whole idea of there are faithless fans out there that want to complain. They're always negative. They're going to be negative. That's just the way that they are. And there's a lot of truth to that. There ain't no question about it. They're not going to be happy until, the first step is making the playoffs. And if they make the playoffs, then they're going to be unhappy about not winning a playoff game and so forth and so on. So that's why it's our job, my job, and hopefully others out there to counter that and try and squash that kind of attitude as best as we can, because we could nitpick stuff about a Jet win against the Dolphins, and what we have to do is just look at this roster again, and that's why I think it's just silly to talk about things like that. This is nowhere near the roster that the Jets are going to have, A, when they're healthy, and B, when they're a much better team next year, hopefully, with the additions that Joe Douglas is going to make. So what you do is, as a loyal fan, is you embrace the fact that they've won 4 out of 5 with a roster that's been broken down by injuries. A lot of young players playing, including the quarterback, that doesn't have a whole lot of experience still. And they're finding ways to win. I mean, even though they're doing it against bad teams, at least they're beating more bad teams and they're losing. And at 4 out of 5. And one was against a winning team at the time. So I think there's a lot to be positive about. Nobody's going crazy about this is a much better team than we thought kind of narrative. But I just don't think at this point in time, when you win a game and you win 4 out of 5 with the roster the way that it looks, and knowing that there's a lot of young guys and a coaching staff that is starting to get acclimated with these players, and the whole organization is hopefully building towards something. These are all positives that people need to start, or at least the realist fans, the loyal fans, will hopefully take into account because we're going to have bad weeks, like really bad weeks, that I hope fans don't, the normal fans don't complain about, including what's going to take place on Thursday night.
You covered. I was about to mention Thursday night. So you're going clearly with the glass half full mentality.
Big surprise,
as opposed
huh?
to the glass. Well, you always go with the glass half full, right? And I'm fine with that to an extent. But I've also tried to insert a dose of realism. Yes, there's no question that injuries have wreaked havoc on this team. There's no question that they're doing quote unquote with a skeleton crew, especially up front, given that the offensive line has been an issue. There's no question that the defensive line is a work in progress, though, as you've said before a couple of times, we've seen progression from a couple of guys, especially guys who were drafted last year, who we didn't see much from last year. Shepard, Fudikasi, guys like that. No Jamal Adams this week. So the overall play was fairly impressive. But as you said, there still remains a lot of work to be done, right? And the key point is kind of maintaining that focus, and it's very difficult week by week, even when you should look longer term, when you're knee deep in the middle of a game or in the middle of a contest, and you see sometimes what's going on, and you see the difficulties they had. It's kind of hard to maintain that perspective, and Thursday night is going to be a very strong indicator of that, because I think both you and I view that this is going to be an exorbitantly tough game. I mean, Baltimore is on paper a far better team than the Jets are. I don't think there's any question about that, and given what we've seen that Baltimore has done this season, even the other day against Buffalo, they are I wouldn't know if I'd call them an elite squad, but they're an extremely dangerous squad who putting up 30-plus points against the Jets wouldn't come as a surprise probably to most of us. So while we're watching that game and a disparity in terms of the talent base between the two teams, we have to recognize that one team is in a position to win now, though they are using younger guys like Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews and guys like that. Another team, which is our Jets, are one that's hopefully building towards that. You have Darnold, similar time frame as Jackson, but he's missed a lot of time and he's still getting his feet wet. You have a overall team that doesn't have the same infrastructure, or at least didn't have the same infrastructure as the Ravens, and they're trying to get to that place. And Joe Douglas's history there is one that you hope he can draw upon and build, because of that next year and the year after. We're kind of if we're not at that level, we are approaching that level next year and get to or hopefully surpass that level in another couple of years.
See, even though right now I would still take Sam Darnold over Lamar Jackson, I do want to see at some point, hopefully by the end of this season, but definitely next season, has to be the season. No excuses as long as he's healthy. And look, if he's not healthy, then that's an issue as well. But Sam Darnold is going to have to start showing drastic improvements by next season. When he has these, like the Dolphins are an opponent that, even though the Jets don't have the best line, the best weapons, and so forth, there's still a lot of times over the last couple of weeks against the Bengals and the Dolphins that there's just a lot left on the table, on the playing field for Sam Darnold. He's not playing as good as we would like to see him at this stage of his career. Even with the injuries and the time missed, he still should be doing better than he's been showing us so far. Yes, it's good that they were able to win the game on the final drive. That's a nice thing. But as you pointed out, the sack there is something you absolutely cannot do. There are still plays that he makes, including the interception. Even though he's only had a couple of interceptions over the last 6 weeks or so, it's like every time he throws a pick, it's just it's one of those real bad interceptions. That just, what are you doing? So there's still a lot of room for growth. I'm not panicking. There's tons of upside. He's a young player, but he's somebody that just at some point I wanna be able to see the light turn on, because if it happens, it could be a beautiful thing. But it just looks like we're gonna have to wait clearly until next season when we have a much better roster around him, where we can then give him a fair grade.
Agreed. Part of the injuries has an impact in terms of what he's done, right? And in terms of what we've seen progression-wise and everything else out of him, he was impacted by missing time last year. He missed 3 weeks, and that was a benefit for him to a certain extent, because he got to take a step back and take a broader perspective look in terms of what's on the field. And this year, the same thing with the mono. week one and then missing several weeks because of it, and then coming back to a team that was a little bit in disarray hasn't helped him. So as you said, next year is hopefully health permitting. Is the year you want. I don't know if you want to say the word quantum growth, but there definitely needs to be accelerated growth out of Darnold.
Yeah, I want to see. I want to see the type of growth next season that you see when you know for sure, even if he's not a completed project. I want next season at some point to be the season where it has to be in my mind where we go, yes, he's definitely the guy, and it's just a matter of a few weeks or a few months, but he's the guy, and we're not able to say that just yet. And again, that's not entirely his fault. As you mentioned with Robbie Anderson, the problems that we talked about with him for the past year or so, with him trying to be a number one receiver, and we've been against that from the start. And now we're finally starting to see some of the things that a number one receiver needs to do. He's still never going to be a number one receiver, but he now has the ability to be a strong number two. If he can continue to make the type of plays that he's been making over the last few weeks, and I'm talking about the plays where the ball's a jump ball and you physically can go up against the DB and make sure you're the one that comes down with it. He's making tough catches. He's just not a one-trick pony anymore, and that is definitely something to feel positive about as they give him some more weapons in the receiving department to make it easier for him as well. When he doesn't have to necessarily be matched up with the number one DB every week.
As I said, his route running was very impressive, and it's something they highlighted even on the broadcast. I mean, you looked at a couple plays, the space that he had down, in and out cuts, getting open down by the left pylon for a potential score that was overthrown by Darnold, in cut to an out cut to go towards the sideline for another gain. He was open a lot in that game. Darnold unfortunately missed him a bunch of times, but I was very impressed by things that you and I have talked about that have been considered a weakness of him, because it seemed to be, as you said, a one-trick pony and more just a deep threat. He really seems to be getting much more wide open in terms of the intermediate type of routes that he's running. And if he can continue to do that, especially down the stretch, he's going to set himself up for a very nice payday this offseason.
And no big surprise that Bilal Powell had a good game in relief of Le'Veon Bell. This is what we knew. We knew that if Le'Veon Bell missed time, Powell would be the number one running back, and that's what he was against Miami. I guess Bell is going to be fine from what we hear. And Adams, do we have any word on Adams yet?
Nothing. So on the Bell thing, Gase said today no disciplinary action against him. He basically kind of said, what do you want him to do?
Right.
My opinion, honestly, yes, a fine is definitely warranted. Look, he was told by the team doctors to stay away from the team because he had the flu. It is a very, very bad optic look, given all the other issues that has existed with him and the team this year, for him to be out bowling the night before a game when he's been ruled out because of the flu. And you compare that and contrast that to Adams, who was on the field, who was allowed to be on the field because clearly his injury is different, but he's one who has always been a team supporter, right? Bell, to a certain extent, gets a pass this year. All of the other stuff we've heard about him, that has not been the case this year, right? Maybe behind the scenes he has been, but at least front and center, he's put the team first and said all the right things. Though I'm cognizant that, look, behind the scenes, he may be a completely different person and a completely different individual in terms of how he's interacting with his teammates, but you haven't heard any of the whispers and innuendos that we've heard coming out of Pittsburgh. Adams has always been a team-first guy. He's the kind of guy that you and I have both talked about as a clear leader on this team, pumping up his teammates, getting his teammates pumped up. But we have not heard word one of an update like we talked about last week. I would be kind of shocked if he is back this year. I know if you ask him, I'm sure he'll want to play. Given the short turnaround, I think he's pretty clear that he's not going to play on Thursday night. Though nothing official has come out. And then we'll have to see the week after as to whether or not he comes back playing the last couple of games of the season.
Yeah, the only thing that bothers me about a story with Bell is because that means, once again, it's the tired narrative that has to be thrown into every story with Le'Veon Bell, and that's that Adam Gase didn't want him. And it's so funny how that kind of stuff happens with writers and lazy analysts. It's like there's a rumor that goes on, and then when somebody wants to talk about it, like a month or two later, they talk about it like it's fact. That's what bothers me. You know what? Maybe that's a fact. Maybe it is. But don't write about it like it's a fact. That is tiresome and lazy. because then they're going to, because you've got a job to do as the analyst, the writer, because the fan is too busy. He's got a job. He's relying on the writer and the analyst to tell him what's fact. So when you make these proclamations every time something goes on with Bell in a negative way, oh, don't forget, Adam Gase never wanted him anyway. Well, no, we don't know if that's a fact that Adam Gase didn't want him anyway. So don't print it like that.
You can couch it in language with it appears to be, it looks likely to be.
Yeah, but you know what? Why even talk about it?
Because every time something comes up where there's a perceived issue between the two of them, the easy default is to go back to the fact that it's potential that Gase didn't want Bell.
Now, you say easy, I say lazy.
You call it potato, I call it potato, right? It's a default position because look, it's almost impossible to prove unless he specifically comes out and says, I did not want.
If he's not here, next year, we'll know for sure.
That may not only be his call, though, right? That could also be Douglas's call based on his salary.
If Adam Gase doesn't want him here, he'll be gone.
Right. If Bell is not here, then it supports the narrative that existed this year, right? Then everything that was written this year is not just fiction, but it's fact.
Yeah, but but how many times? But do they write like that, and then it's not true, and then they just get a pass? That's why I have to keep saying this, and I don't want to have to keep saying this, but I have to, because they have to be held accountable. Because a lot of times, Bell will be here for the next 2 or 3 years, and then it's all forgotten. So no, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Because you can't tell me that Jet fans don't know this story already. We all know it. So stop reminding us.
It's easy to throw the one-liner into a story.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So roster moves, and here they come the injuries again. So Mollett starts to play well, and then he gets hurt, and then Kyron Brown gets an opportunity to start, which was nice to see after the good preseason, and we talked them up in the preseason. What is that noise?
Don't know.
Sounds like a rubber band or something. All right, so Kyron Brown gets the opportunity to start, and then he's out now. Now he's on injured reserve after one start. So there was a couple of roster moves, and it was both from Boston College. So Jeff Smith, the practice squad wide receiver, now moves into and I don't really expect Jeff Smith to do much. Maybe he'll be a returner. I don't know. They got Berrios back there as a punt returner.
He could get a shot at returning it, though. Berrios, other than the one return, really hasn't done it in order.
Yeah, or he'll just be a kick returner, even though that never seems to matter anyway nowadays. But Wyatt Ray could be interesting. I doubt we'll see much of him this year, but Wyatt Ray was a very productive pass rusher at Boston College. Just taking a look at the R-Lads write-up on Wyatt Ray, who went undrafted to the Cleveland Browns. And taking a look, last year he had 11.5 tackles for loss and 9 sacks. Productive pass rusher, played the edge position that included defensive end and an outside linebacker. So he's got the ability to rush the passer, and we need as many diamonds in the rough as we can find as possible in that department. So we'll keep an eye on him and see if he gets a chance, because there have been a bunch of players, whether it's a Kyle Phillips or a late rounder like a Fudakasi, or maybe even a last-minute free agent like James Burgess, who they have been given the opportunity to play, and some of these players, like the ones I've mentioned, have come through. And we talked about it when Burgess was a very quiet pickup in the beginning of the season. Keep an eye on him. We talked then that he was a very solid guy off the bench if you need him in a pinch because of his experience under Greg Williams. And he's making the most of his opportunity, as has Neville Hewitt. I think Burgess has actually made bigger plays than Neville Hewitt. So it's nice to see, and I'm sure these are guys that might be able to still stick around next year as backups.
Absolutely. I mean, Burgess would have had an even better play, but I think the call on him on the holding call was the right call. It was a little bit of a touch, but he did grab the guys. He went past him enough that the penalty got called, negating the touchdown interception and return. But Burgess has played fairly well. He's made mistakes, But you can see the athleticism that exists. So the mistakes or things are going to have to get cleaned up for him to maintain a role on this team.
Okay, so again, the Thursday game. Oh, by the way, it was good to see Ficken make the field goal. We had talked about his
Yeah.
ability to make game winners in college, so he had that ability in him in a big spot. And we didn't know, though, how he would be able to do it with the Jets. So it's a good sign because this gives him, as long as he keeps hitting big field goals like that before the season ends, if it comes up anymore, he'll more than likely get a shot at being the starter next year.
I would assume so. I mean, again, given the revolving door that we've seen kickers this year all over the NFL, nothing is set in stone. But it gives the Jets maybe one less thing to worry about in the offseason if they think that Ficken can do
Yeah,
the
because
job.
we keep talking about the injury to C.J. Mosley and how the Jets blew Week 1, but we keep forgetting that if they had a reliable place kicker in Week 1,
Yep.
we might have won that game as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and right there, that was Joe Douglas's first mistake. Was that crazy kicker from where was he from? Sweden, something like that.
I think so. Yes.
He's probably back in
Yes.
Sweden right now, for all we know. All right, sounds good, Jan. So you're going to enjoy the game on Thursday night, you think?
We'll see what the results are during the
Scary.
game, and then I can let you know what it's like. I'll be interested in watching Lamar Jackson. let's put
This
it
is
that
how
way.
we're going to watch. We're going to have, like, our eyes are going to kind
One,
of.
our eyes partially
Yeah.
open with our fingers
Yeah,
in front of it and peering through. Yes.
So hopefully they can at least make it is it possible we can make it a 4-quarter game? I hope. Hope.
That would be nice. You just don't want to get embarrassed. On
No,
that.
we've
Let's
already
put it that
been
way.
embarrassed once on national TV.
Correct. Yep.
And this
Agreed.
organization and Adam Gase, even though he's not going anywhere, they just cannot afford another embarrassing moment on national TV. All right. As always, Jan, appreciate your time. Hopefully you'll enjoy the game on Thursday night, and we'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Looking forward.